Spain's green energy blackout and what it means for America. Jen Psaki tries to cover up the Biden cover-up, and an update on President Trump's big, beautiful bill. All of that and more today on 10-Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
We begin today checking back in on President Trump's big, beautiful bill. Right now, the House of Representatives is working at breakneck speed to try and pass a bill before Memorial Day. Speaker Mike Johnson said that he will not gavel out the House of Representatives for recess for that holiday until they have passed a bill and sent it along to the Senate. There are two major hiccups, and I wouldn't say hiccups, I'd say two sticking points that House Republicans are debating right now amongst themselves. One of them is Medicaid. Later this week, we're going to talk about polling about Medicaid and about the Americans' concern for the massive amount of potential fraud, waste, and abuse in that program. We did talk about that once a few weeks ago, but we're going to get into just how the American people feel about the importance of cutting that fraud, waste, and abuse so that the program can work better. But the other most important part of this really is the tax cuts and the extension of the 2017 middle-class tax cuts that we know benefited Americans across the board. One thing that we've seen this week is House Republicans beginning to go on offense on that issue.
Extending the tax cuts that have been in place for the last 7 years is imperative. If we don't get it done, Joe, the average American is going to experience $1,600 in increase in their taxes. The average American.
As Congressman Emmer says, this is an important issue because without the extension of these tax cuts, every American will see a tax increase. And at a time when Americans are overwhelmingly concerned about the cost of living, you do not want to be on the side of voting to raise their taxes, which is what every single Democrat is planning on doing right now by opposing the extension of these middle-class tax cuts. So we'll keep an eye on this issue. But at this same time, as House Democrats are continuing to flail against the big, beautiful bill and the Trump agenda, new word comes in that Kamala Harris is thinking about a comeback.
Who saw that video from a couple of weeks ago, the one of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo during the earthquake? Everybody's asking me what you've been thinking about these days. Well, here those elephants were. And as soon as they felt the earth shaking beneath their feet, they got in a circle and stood next to each other to protect the most vulnerable. Think about it. What a powerful metaphor.
However, CNN polling finds that people still are not particularly hot on Kamala Harris.
This looks a heck of a lot like the election result. We have just seen this in poll after poll after poll. Despite the fact that Trump's favorable ratings aren't too hot to trot, when he's matched up against who he was matched up in 2024, he still, across the polls, scores a higher percentage than Kamala Harris did.
It's not just Kamala Harris that voters are unsure about. It's also Democrat leaders in Washington.
So who do you trust more on the U.S. main problems, the main problems in the United States? Well, what do we have here? It's the same exact picture, folks. It's the same exact picture. When you match Donald Trump against his actual competition, Donald Trump comes out ahead. Look at this, 40% to congressional Democrats, 32%.
What this tells us is that while approval ratings might show people have questions about President Trump and some of his recent actions, they don't like what they're seeing from the other side either. So as we look at midterms, and we had an extensive midterm preview last week, the dynamics are a lot different. President Trump is not facing the dynamics that he was facing at this time in 2017 going into 2018. That can shift, but as long as Democrats continue to have no direction, no leadership, no ideas, President Trump will continue to be able to roll forward and continue to press his agenda. On April 22nd, the media celebrated Spain's announcement that they had had an entire day on 100% renewable energy. But on April 28th, Spain announced the largest blackout in the history of the country.
Europe experiencing a historic cross-border power outage on Monday, and the region's leaders are doing everything possible to not blame renewable energy.
When the wind stops blowing, that's the end of your electric. Let's hurry up. Darling, is the wind blowing today? I'd like to watch television, darling.
Now, there are smart people working on battery storage so that you can store more wind and solar energy that's collected. But until that's done, this is going to be a major problem. And what we're seeing here is in these European countries, they've made policy that's completely disconnected from people. They are cannibalizing their oil, natural gas, and nuclear capabilities, even though those are making up about 60 to 70% of their electricity generation. And this is forcing them to do things like relying on Russia for Russian oil and gas, which is actually fueling Russia's war in Ukraine. So this is a very important cautionary tale for American states. In the last few weeks, in states like New Jersey, Maryland, and others, people are getting warnings that their utility bills are about to skyrocket over the summer due to increased power usage because people want to do crazy things like run air conditioning in their homes. If you live in the DC area, you know how important that air conditioning is. Guess what? It's going to get a lot more expensive. And the reason is very similar to what they're seeing in Europe. These states have adopted crazy net zero policies where they're committing to get rid of all of their energy that's not wind, solar, renewable by a date like 2030 or 2035. As you look at this map, you'll see so many states have made these far-reaching commitments to get rid of these sources of energy that they're primarily relying on, even though they don't have a plan to back that up. Last Thursday, 35 House Democrats joined Republicans to block California's EV mandate, which called to end sales of all gas-powered cars in the state of California by 2035. Here's how the Wall Street Journal described that EV ban. The mandate is ludicrously impossible to meet. It says zero emissions vehicles would have to account for 43% of an automaker's sales by 2027 in California and a dozen other states that have signed up for its rules. It rises to 68% by 2030. So again, this is a problem not just for California, but for the whole country because automobile manufacturers have to design their fleets around California's absurd overreaching law. And one of the big challenges these automakers have faced is demand for electric vehicles has gone down drastically, especially in a place like California, where they've already seen challenges to their electric grid, where they've been told, please don't charge your electric vehicle tonight because we don't have enough power. So this, just like the issue of blue state overreach that's driving up utility bills, highlights this issue that policy needs to be about people. It can't be about politics, and it can't be about abstract goals like what some European dark money group believes you need to be doing about climate change. You can't ban gas-powered cars when people aren't buying electric vehicles. You can't get rid of coal, natural gas, and nuclear without a plan to make up for that power supply when, 60 or 70% of your state's electricity is driven by those sources. So again, it's so important that policy be made with people in mind. Last week, Democrats in the House and Senate reintroduced a bill that they call the Equality Act. Now, they suggest that this bill is about protecting LGBT equality, but opponents suggest that it takes away women's rights in a number of really important issues. One, women's sports. The Equality Act would override state laws and President Trump's executive orders preventing biological men from competing in women's sports. This bill would also seek to override state laws preventing youth from being able to get permanent sex change surgeries or medical treatments. This bill, lastly, would override state laws about keeping biological men out of girls' bathrooms. All three of those issues, protecting girls' bathrooms, protecting women's sports, and banning permanent sex change surgeries for minors, are overwhelmingly supported by the American people. These are all 75 to 80% supported. But Democrats, nonetheless, are answering the call of the dark money groups that support these issues, like the Human Rights Campaign. This will be a tough co-sponsorship for people like Georgia Senator Jon Ossoff. We've already seen polling that suggests his position of opposing protecting women's sports, his position of allowing biological men into women's sports, actually puts him in an incredibly negative position in his reelection in 2026. So we'll see where this issue goes. For today's You Can't Make It Up segment, we have a clip from former Biden White House press secretary Jen Psaki.
Cover-up is a very loaded term, I think.
Well, it means you knew that it was really bad and you're pretending otherwise, versus you're deluding yourself, which I think is what people do a lot.
Well, I understand, but I still think it's like cover-up is often like a crime. I think it's a bit of a dangerous term.
So Jen Psaki thinks it's dangerous to use the word cover-up to describe the efforts that Biden's staff, and in a lot of cases the media, went to hide President Biden's true condition from the American people, so that when they saw him on the debate stage in June, they were shocked at just how far he had declined. She thinks that that word, cover-up, is dangerous. I think it's dangerous that we went as long as we did without a functioning president of the United States. That while our adversaries were aligning against us, we didn't have a commander-in-chief. And for so many of the worst policies that we've seen that came from the end of the Biden administration, now we know in a lot of cases those were likely signed by AutoPen, operated by a 20-year-old staffer who was not elected. So I think that this is going to continue to unravel, and I think we're going to continue to hear more and more about those efforts that were taken to cover up President Biden's decline, and I hope that it will help us so that we never have something like that happen again. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us here at 10 Minute Drill. Please subscribe, follow us, leave a comment, leave a review, tell your friends. Thanks so much. Have a good day.